Welcome to Grid Live Pre-Race NASCAR Cup Series final race of the year. Plenty to talk about. We have the Championship 4, Kyle Busch winning streak in jeopardy, and the final race for Martin Truex Jr. full-time career, plus Stewart's Hot Racing last race as an organization. Jackson Todd from 36xracing.com joins me. I'm Joe Samaniego. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin the Shell, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network. You too can invest in the Grid Network. Link in the video description. We also accept super chats and buy me a coffee. A big thank you to Amber for giving a big super chat to Ben and Brandon on Grid Encore this past Monday. Jackson, Championship 4 is set. But let's be honest, the big talk was the controversy at the end of the Martinsville race. Still a lot going on with that. We saw NASCAR handed down penalties against the drivers, the crew chiefs, the spotters, team executives, over $600,000 worth of penalties. 2311 Racing and RCR, they both dropped their appeals before the appeal hearing. Trackhouse did not, and they lost their appeal. Of course, all appeals heard by the National Motorsports Appeal Panel. Board has the case. That's what they heard. The appeal panel consisted of Kelly Houseby, Lynn St. James, of course, former IndyCar driver and Indy 500 starter, Steve York. They all upheld the penalty for the number one team. After all this, do you believe the manufacturers and teams will now be deterred from manipulating the on-track products?
I think they certainly need to be a little bit more careful with what they're saying on the radio. I think between the Austin Dillon incident back at Richmond and then this weekend is like, guys, if you're gonna, play some shady games out there, don't say it on the radio. Like, at least, go back to the spin gate, like your arm's itching. Like, come on, come up with something. That would be step one. But obviously the kind of more important, bigger problem here is that this was not kind of the thing we see normally when we're the borderline, I guess, manipulation you could call it, where you're helping your teammate. That's just giving them a little bit more room, right? That's not like fully changing your day for them. It's a little different. Where this crossed the line is like, guys were changing their own days to benefit somebody else. I think that's a pretty clear line that was crossed. It wasn't just giving them a little extra, maybe staying out of their way. This was changing your own race. That's where the line was crossed. And I think this kind of reaffirms that line. I guess we need to check in on every once in a while. These are good penalties. Could have, gone even a little more intense with them if you wanted to, but I think the fact this is Championship 4 week, kind of keep it straight up like this. And the other teams not appealing, kind of keeps that same, that same message going. But I think they'll be a little bit more deterred, at least a little bit more careful, maybe with how they do things. And just really, really not pretty. Really, kind of just disappointed with how that all went down.
Very disappointing. I know we had a fiery show Sunday, Monday following the race. I feel this is almost, as you said, the teams are going to be more careful not to say it right there on the radio. Oh, does the one team know the plan? What plan? I'm concerned there's just going to be now more code words. It's going to be more harder for NASCAR to find, just because, my opinion, team orders, or in this case, manufacturer orders, just occurs in racing, and it's just too hard for the sanctioning body, whereas the FIA, NASCAR, other series, to try to police it. And of course, we'll just have to wait and see what's going to happen throughout 2025, 2024 with this last race. With this last race, let's start with one of the first championship drivers that got in, mainly because of the penalty against Christopher Bell. William Byron, he was out until Christopher Bell was penalized for riding the wall. Essentially, a little bit of contact with Bubba Wallace, hit the wall, floored it, got around. William Byron, who has the second best favorite to win the championship, started the year winning the Daytona 500. First driver to win multiple races and the Daytona 500 since Denny Hamlin, 2021, quite a ways back. Trying to become the first driver since Jimmy Johnson to win the Daytona 500 and the Cup Series Championship. That was in 2013. However, his last win was Martinsville in April. Some top 10s, a couple top 5s. Playoff, he's been getting top 10 finishes. He's been looking good, but we remember what happened to him in this race last year, where he just didn't seem to have the car for the win. Can Chevrolet's only hope overcome essentially the Toyota and the two Ford drivers contending against him?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. For what it's worth, he was second of the four on fastest lap in practice. He was ahead of Logano there, behind both of the Penske cars on the 10-lap average. I think we kind of figured coming in, like the two Penske cars would be the favorites. They've obviously where's it at? They've won this the last 2 years. They've done their job. I think the main path to a title for the 24 and 2024 would be if they go out there, to qualify well, and then they kind of just try to own the race from the get-go. But it's the William Byron story is really interesting. It feels like kind of the theme with him the last few years has been he does so well in the spring. Like April is like the month of William Byron, and then he kind of just disappears over the summer. And it's not like he's done bad in the playoffs. Like obviously, the repeat championship 4, but he doesn't get those wins late in the year, and that's what NASCAR is all about, right? It's about winning races. That's what this format rewards. It's great he's had these top 10s. He was the one guy to point his way into the championship 4. It got him that far. But if he wants to win the championship, he has to get those wins late in the year. I say all this, and if he wins tomorrow, then suddenly this is all, canceled out, and he's, proven it all wrong. He can win these late in season races, but that kind of just seems to be the story for him. So it's possible. It doesn't look great for him. I think it would just take like a really dominant performance from the get-go.
It's funny sometimes when we talk about drivers and, oh, they can't get this done, then they seem to go out there the next day, get the job done. It's like, were you watching the show? Did we get you riled up to get the job done? I have to agree. The one thing I do feel, at least William Byron, we haven't seen this year, and then last year I say was pretty good sign too. When he was a rookie, and I would say the first 2 seasons, it seemed like if he was up front, everything was going great, no problems. But then he fell back. It seemed like he then pushed it too hard, get involved in crashes, not finish the race. He's been finishing the races. I feel like he has really matured a lot from that first rookie season. But he just cannot seem to get the wins when it really matters the most. Great that he had a good season with the Daytona 500 win, getting the Daytona 500, a couple other wins earlier this year. But since April, quite a long time before he was able to get back into victory lane. Of course, William Byron, he is just one of the championship 4. And while Chevrolet, they essentially got him because of that penalty, that prevented Toyota from having 2 cars in the championship. But Ford, they have 2 cars in the championship. Of course, Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano, both of them for Team Penske. Roger Penske has to feel pretty good, 50% chance when you think of the 4 of getting the championship. Looking for a 3rd consecutive championship as a team owner. You had a 22 in 2022, 2023 to 12. Unfortunate, the 2 cannot make it the following year. Then will be continuing that pattern. Of course, Joey Logano kept his even streak year going. Blaney 2 in a row. But now the 2 of them are going to be racing each other as well as the other 2 for the championship. Does Penske have any concerns about the 2 drivers racing each other too hard and causing that championship to slip away? I believe you're muted, so.
You're right. I am. All right. Hello. Back in 2020, we had the 2 Penskes of Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano in the championship 4, and it didn't seem to be an issue then. That being said, of course, Chase Elliott went on to win that championship, even though he had to start in the back of the field. But I don't think it'll be an issue with them racing too hard, dare I say. But we know that Penske is. I mean, we talk about it, I guess, more on the IndyCar side than we do on the NASCAR side. But they're very, very much like, hey guys, go race. They don't do as much of the kind of the team order shenanigans, I guess. As long as both guys are in contention, they can both go for it. And I don't know. It's I don't know. They are. I kind of said earlier, I called them kind of the favorites going into this weekend. Obviously, they've done this the last 2 times, so it'll be a new dynamic for them. But I'd still consider them the favorites.
They have to be the favorites. I think, like you said, My main concern would be, particularly in the closing stages where Joey Logano does not give an inch. Ryan Blaney's going to be aggressive throughout the race. I think they're going to be both. They're both championship caliber drivers. I think they'll race each other, give each other enough room. Team Penske at the end, though, that's where it's going to get dicey. But of course, no matter who it is, especially if it's William Byron or Tyler Reddick, they're not going to give that inch. And as I mentioned, Tyler Reddick, of course, he is representing 2311. First time 2311 finds himself in the championship four. He is leading the 45 team owned by NBA legend Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin. But yesterday, big blow to 2311 and their lawsuit. Team was in the news. The court to appeal for the lawsuit didn't work out against him. We'll get a little bit more details into that. But I have to ask you, would a Tyler Reddick championship complicate life for NASCAR and 2311 and Tyler Reddick?
I don't know if it would complicate things, but it would certainly add an extra little flair. I feel like on everything that happens. Even Reddick making it to the championship four just feels like a little bit of a oh snap, there he is. Especially 2211 making the championship for the first time. Of all years, of all weeks, this is when they get it done. I mean, it's certainly been we've been trending in that direction, but the timing of it is just has that extra flavor to it. I think what this really gets into is that I'll talk about it in a second here, but the contracts that are reliant on 2311 having these charters, and then what impact that would have. And if that impact is not just on one of your major teams that is owned by Michael Jordan, but it's also your defending champion, that would certainly be a huge factor here. And then also, I mean, of course, if they're going to have to, they're going to be competing as open on-charter entries. Is there a scenario where Tyler Reddick misses the Daytona 500 and your defending champion misses your first race of the season? I guess that where it would certainly get a little messy, but 2311 has to be, a little proud to at least have the performance to, I guess, not justify their stance because it's not related to their performance, but a little bit of like, yeah, and also we are good at doing the sport.
They got to be proud of what they've done on the track. I feel Tyler Reddick, if they were to win the championship, they'll be professional enough to appear at all the media obligations for NASCAR, put on that championship face. Yeah, the headlines will be behind of what's going on with the lawsuit, but overall, I think they could at least fulfill the duties that we anticipate of a champion, promoting the sport, hyping up people for next year, and of course, satisfying their sponsors. Now, of course, as I mentioned, the details we'll get into. Yesterday, a federal judge denied the preliminary injunction for 2311 and Front Row Motorsports. This means both teams will likely race without a charter next year. Their case was, hey, we want this preliminary injunction so we can have some sort of charter for next year. But as the judge stated, there is no evidence, essentially the burden of proof, that shows racing without the charters will result in irreparable harm. Now, those four are looking at racing as open teams with no guaranteed spots, very likely unless NASCAR decides to do something, which I'm not sure that's going to happen. It was disclosed during the hearing that there is a clause that Tyler Reddick and his team sponsors wanted to leave because they were an open team. They could. Could this be a distraction for Tyler Reddick, 2311, knowing that there's this uncertainty about 2025? And do you agree with the ruling from the federal judge that essentially racing without a charter does not do enough irreparable harm to the team?
Yeah, it kind of, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like a collective bargaining agreement, right? Like NASCAR basically said, if you want the benefits of being a charter team, it also means maybe I guess you won't get benefits in some other ways. In 2311, I mean, if their main harm is their own sponsor issues, well, they set up their sponsors that way. So while the kind of antitrust element of it is its own thing, this part, this ruling does make sense. As much as I want to side with 2311, this does make sense. I don't know if I would call it a distraction. I mean, if it was a distraction, I don't think Tyler Reddick makes it to the championship four. I mean, maybe they can use it as a motivate, but like, I mean, we just talked about like, might as well make it a little awkward for NASCAR if you can. Like, let's go win these races. Let's not only just like do our job and do what we like to do, but like, if we can just win it, that would certainly be nice. In terms of, but like just in terms of their performance this weekend, Tyler Reddick, he only has one top 10. His 3 starts at Phoenix with 23-11 racing. So just if he doesn't win the championship, it's not because this was a distraction. I think he's kind of just generally considered kind of 4th of the 4 heading into this weekend in terms of Phoenix potential. But yeah, it's just this. I mean, and this is our offseason story, I guess, right? Is how this continues and how this moves forward.
Yeah, this will be the number one story of the off season, especially if some team looks to get him and his sponsors. I don't really see any other team worthwhile. 23-11 seems to be in a good spot. And right now, we have 40 cars in this field. I cannot recall of a race with more than 40 cars besides the Daytona 500. That might be the one race they're at a risk. But the rest of the season, I think they're pretty safe. The only thing with the Daytona 500, if they were to miss that race, that's the biggest paying race of the year. That's the most viewed race of the year. That would be very detrimental short term for the team and their sponsors. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this all happened. I have a follow-up question since we're talking a lot about 23-11. Denny Hamlin, he is the co-owner. Now he's going to be racing against his drivers, and of course, everybody else. He'll love to get a win. Martinsville, though, I think a lot of viewers, and maybe even some race officials, are going to have a much watchful and more critique of what's going on the track if they're looking for any manipulation. Could Denny Hamlin be under additional scrutiny for how he races the Championship 4?
This hasn't been an issue for Hamlin before, at least that we know of. We haven't, not that I've seen, not that I know of. This hasn't been an issue for Hamlin, and I think on top of that, the Championship 4, they're given the respect of being in the Championship 4. No one wants to be remembered as the person that took someone out of championship contention or caused that conflict. You don't want to put NASCAR in the situation. You don't want to be in that situation yourself. So I think Hamlin he'll be able to mind his business. I mean, and then on top of all this other, all the legal stuff we've been talking about, just throw that in there as well. But NASCAR will certainly be tuned in, I would think, after all the drama last week. Keeping an eye on things. I know even Joey Logano was like complaining in practice that the Chevys were, getting in his way. So, tensions are high right now, which is, I mean, I guess that's the playoff drama, right?
That's the thing. We've seen it time and time again that accusations of, the Chevy drivers are racing me too hard, or a teammate of a driver in the Championship 4 is racing somebody too hard. The best example I could think of was when Kevin Harvick spun Kyle Busch at Homestead and said, hey, Denny Hamlin's teammates were racing me like clowns, so I spun him, wrecked him. So it's going to be really interesting to see if that gets a little bit more extra attention, because it feels like this occurs every year. But after everything in Martinsville, I think people might be just a little bit more, okay, we see what's going on. But this is where it gets back to, it's just so hard to enforce any sort of rule about team owners manipulating the race or just racing and knowing, hey, I'm going to make life a little harder for this Ford or Toyota or Chevy driver to get around me. Now, we talked a lot about the playoff drivers. Outside the playoffs, you have 36 other drivers racing for the win. They're going to be trying to get as high of a position as possible. 40 cars in this field, one driver looking to win at almost any cost. Kyle Busch, a 19-year streak of winning at least one race, is at risk if he does not win a race at Phoenix. This is a NASCAR record. I still remember when Ricky Rudd's streak of 16 years with at least one win came to an end. He was going to Robert Yates Racing. he wanted anything experimental to go in that car, had a good race, but it still got snapped. How far do you think Kyle Busch is willing to go to get a win? And do you believe he will be a winning contender at Phoenix?
Yeah, I mean the unfortunate layer here is that it's like it's in a championship race, right? Like it would be really hard for Kyle to go out there and beat the championship for. I really don't I don't see that happening this weekend. Um, there were chances this year for Kyle, right? Like, I mean, the one that particularly stands out is Darlington. That would have been the perfect opportunity. End of the regular season, take that win, get into the playoffs. I mean, that was the drama of that moment, right? It was either Kyle Busch getting this win or Chase Briscoe and SHR, and ended up going the way of Chase Briscoe and SHR. And I think if if he has an opportunity, he's going to go for it, but I really don't see him getting close to an opportunity this weekend. It's he's not at the top of these practice charts. Kind of just the way the season has gone, but still a streak and a record that definitely deserves to be celebrated. And especially in this era where I mean a bunch of guys are kind of winning all over the place. The consistency for that long, very impressive, and I mean certainly one of the best to ever drive in NASCAR.
One of the best drivers, Kyle Busch, of course, he's going to be trying to get a win. If he does, he'll be the second year in a row we have a non-playoff driver win here. Ross Chastain did that last year, and he really annoyed Ryan Blaney for racing him hard for the win. This year, potentially more drivers might be feeling a little bit fearless when it comes to going for that win because they saw Ross Chastain do it. Now they want to try to give that effort. 40 drivers in the field. I think this is going to be a really fascinating race just because you have a full field at Phoenix. But do you believe there's any non-playoff drivers that could win? And if so, which drivers are you looking at?
I'd say the one that stands out is, of course, going to be Kyle Larson. We have to mention Kyle Larson every week, even if he's out of the playoffs. Fourth in 10-lap average, third overall, and even that overall fast lap that was on lap 6 of his run, not the standard 2, 3, 4, 5 range. Just an extra lap later. I think that's interesting. Which of course sets up the scenario that if Larson wins this race, that he didn't win the championship. He won the championship race. He had a perfect season, except for the mistake at Homestead. And I think if Larson wins this race, it's going to set up, just for more discourse about the format and the championship and all that. Just it really annoys me. But if Larson wins this, it all goes back to that move at Homestead, right? Trying to lap Austin Dillon and taking yourself out of contention there. Like, I know he wants to go for the win, but geez, that scenario. If it's going to wreck you, don't do that. I love Kyle Larson for his aggression and how sometimes he does end up making those mistakes, but the regular season racing and the playoff racing is a different game. And that mistake might have just cost him a championship. So I don't think, I don't know. I don't know if you can, dunk the format on that one. It would be, a Kyle Larson mistake that would really end up, coming around if he gets it done this week.
Kyle Larson has to be one of the favorites. I'm curious how Christopher Bell's going to respond. Does he have the motivation and the momentum to go for the win, or is it going to be running on empty and they're just going to be midfield, not a factor at all?
Especially Bell, because he's been here in the championship for the last few years and hasn't gotten it done. But if he did this year, that would also be quite the story. And that would be different than the Larson, because that would come down, to the penalties and officiating of Martinsville, whereas Larson, it would be more about his mistake at Homestead.
Now, I got a follow-up question because we talk about this format and the criticism, especially if Kyle Larson gets that 7th win. I heard folks online saying that if Joey Logano was to get this championship, record books will show it. This is his 3rd championship, but we know the way his season has been quite a ways back. And then people are going to point to, okay, he got in because of Bowman's disqualification. He won a race using fuel strategy, which a win's a win. But Bill had that better car. If there was one more lap, Bill probably would have been the winner. Do you think, similar to if Larson wins, people will be questioning this format? If Logano gets the championship, will that still be the same discussion, questioning this format? Or will he be still a legitimate champion.
Here's what I'll present, I guess, in defense of Joey Logano. I'll say that there are 5 drivers in the Cup Series this year that have multiple wins. They all have at least 3. 4 of those guys are in the championship 4. The guy with 6 wins, Kyle Larson, just talked about throwing it away at Homestead. The other guy, Denny Hamlin, was kind of really just hot in the spring when the Fords were missing. And then, I mean, he talked about it. He's surprised he made it as deep in the playoffs as they did. So, I mean, I guess he doesn't have, and then, okay, next step here. I mean, if you give the Richmond win that Austin Dillon, although he won that race, he didn't get the playoff qualification from it. So if that win ends up going to Logano, then he actually has the most wins of the championship 4. But that's playing what if scenarios. That's not a good defense here. But we've been in this format for a decade. We've been in the playoff point format for 8 years. Everyone knows how this works. I just simply play the game. If you're Kyle Larson at Homestead, make the move differently. Why are you, don't worry about, I don't really know what to say anymore at this point. Like, the format's the format. Everyone knows what it is. Go out there and perform. If you're really the best driver, then it should be easy to move on, right? Like, it shouldn't matter. So I don't know. People, you put weight in top 10s, but like wins, W's, the W, finishing first place in the race. That's what pay. That's what pays out at the end of the day on the individual race day, and then the season as a whole. I've been in this era for a while. It is what it is. I don't know. I'm not a huge playoff. I guess I'm not like a big playoff supporter, encouragement, but I will at least defend it while it's the format at hand.
Yesterday, during the State of the Sport, Steve Phelps said all the drivers know the rule going into the season. I feel like everybody knows the rules. There are key moments. A win is more important. Winning at the playoffs is much more important than a win at, say, New Hampshire. Granted, still, that win in New Hampshire could be the difference between the playoff points advancing to the next round or the regular season championship. So going out there and just getting the win, even if it's fuel strategy, I think that was brilliant what he did with the fuel strategy game.
Yeah. And you can't equate, a 9th place finish, a top 10 finish at Dover is not the same thing as a top 10 finish with stage points in an elimination race at Martinsville. You can't, if you look at the list of stats, it's gonna the top 10 at Dover, but the top 10 in Martinsville elimination race. Those are 2 very different top 10s, but they get looked at the same way on the stat sheet. It's really easy to look at those as, they're both 9th place finishes, but what people are racing for in each race is so important. And it's just everyone's racing a different race every day, and all the way throughout the season, and that's what makes this format interesting. And when you look at it from that lens, and not just this, the stat sheets, when you actually look at the races, I think that makes it a lot more interesting.
It does. It makes the racing interesting. And then the other thing too, I feel with this format, I really feel like we don't have an illegitimate champion yet. I mean, everybody, I feel, has been deserving in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And, a playoff run, while some people say, well, the regular season, they didn't do anything. But they did in the playoffs. They knew the rules.
And even in 2024, you can't even in the next particular. I mean, first of all, the playoff. If we were still in the 2014 to 2016 version of this, I would agree with a lot of the points being made. But the playoff points, the regular season bonus, the next gen era, and the wins, these have all since negated a lot of those complaints that would have been a lot more valid in 2014 to 2016. Your regular season performance does matter. The win at Dover would matter a lot more than the top 10 at Dover. And it's hard. You can't stumble your way into the championship 4. That's just not possible. Alone, the way it looks is you basically have 3 winners from the round of 8 races, and then the top guy on points, which if you're going to point your way into the championship 4, you're already going against, I guess I won't declare them the 8 best, but 8 of the best. And you're beating them over this 3-race sprint, along with your playoff points from the regular season. it's really hard to end up with, an unworthy champion. It takes a lot to get all the way to this point. And also on top of that, the playoffs are they're more than a quarter of the season. This 10 race stretch is more than a quarter of the season. So if you're performing well in the playoffs, that's still as if you performed really well over the summer or in the spring. Like it's a whole chunk of the season. So it's just there are some arguments to be made, I guess, over the playoff format, but a lot of them just seem to have some like solutions or rebuttals that I don't know. I guess I find pretty obvious or pretty clear.
Yeah, this format, I think it has some a little bit of the not so great side with what happened in Martinsville, but the move we saw from Tyler Reddick at Homestead, what a moment! Right. Of course, the Hail Mary, a lot of people remember that. Even I think people forget about some of the valiant efforts that didn't exactly turn out successful. Clint Bowyer at the Roval with no power steering and how exhausted he looked outside of his car. Is like, this really brings it all out. And of course, we got comments in the chat room. Ben Schneider, there are no illegitimate champions. Even Kyle Busch in 2015 can't be blamed by NASCAR giving him a waiver. It's absolutely unfair to blame the drivers. But that's not going to stop me from criticism of the system itself. We're not a stick and ball sport. I don't think we should compare ourselves to. I think he has some good points. It's not exactly a perfect system as well. I think last week was a good example of it.
Yeah, I think I'm sure Ben and I, we have very different views on this format. I'm sure we could have a 3-hour special talking about it. But I think, the one thing, the Kyle Busch 2015 stands out to me. And I think that's kind of a scenario where like playoff points would have obviously, played a role and, hurt those chances a little bit. But, there's still some impressive element to Kyle Busch coming back, getting the wins, getting in the top 30, and then still showing up after, a big chunk out of the season. Not that, like I said, I don't love the 2014 to 2016 version, but other than that, I think the one thing that I would present is I don't love the championship race just being like the best finisher of the four. If there's some way to bring, there's got to be an extra element to kind of decide this last piece. I would love if there was like a, the playoff points still mattering somehow, or, the stage points and the playoff points adding up somehow. I'd like to see some way for that to get combined, or even if it would change the schedule, you'd have to change the structure, but a 3-race final round, I guess is also kind of in that same line of thought.
I've always thought, I know it makes it a little less first person to cross the finish line gets the win, but I always thought, why they just, okay, whoever, based on your playoff seeding or total playoff points, if you were the fourth place driver in the championship for it, you're 4 points behind. 3 points, 2 points, 1 point. I just think that might be where it's like, okay, if you beat the number 1 seed driver, you got to beat them now by 2 positions or win that race. But I know at the same time that a little bit of extra work, but I feel like, because overall this format does guarantee we're going to have a championship battle in the last race, but I feel it's not as, for me at least this week, I feel we haven't talked much about this, maybe because of the controversy, but I just feel it's not the same compared to when it was Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, last race 2021. That was a talk all week. 1992, everybody was excited for that race just because it didn't occur regularly. I have to agree with you in that instance. In the chat room, Ben, Kyle Busch 2015 comeback was remarkable. You can't argue with that. And I got to say as well, too, you bring up a good point. If there was playoff points and that top 30 rule, that would have made it really hard for him. And of course, Adam agreeing with Ben. All this talk about the playoffs, we'll see what happens. Who's going to win this race? Martin Truex Jr., he is in this race trying to get one last win. He's in the throwback paint scheme to his NASCAR Cup Series debut. Happens to be with the same sponsor, Bass Pro Shop. A little bit different DEI stripes, probably because of the copyright, but overall car looks beautiful. This is his final race as a full-time driver, and then, of course, the last race for Stewart-Haas Racing. 4-car team, Tony Stewart, Gene Haas, 2 championship drivers, of course, Tony Stewart, when he had a winless regular season and then came alive in the playoffs, and Kevin Harvick in the number 4 Budweiser Chevrolet getting their second championship. What are you going to remember from Martin Truex's career and Stewart-Haas' tenure in the Cup Series?
To start with Martin Truex Jr., I think, just the story of his career, right? Kind of the journeyman driver. That's kind of, a baseball thing more than you're talking about in racing. And I don't know if we'll see a career arc quite like his again. Kind of the new textbook career is, the truck and Xfinity is a pretty clear, like you have this development ladder that NASCAR has really developed. And you might sit in kind of like an affiliate ride in the Cup Series for your first few years, and then you move into the big team. I don't know if you're going to have, somebody like Truex that's around for like, a couple hundred career starts, and then he kind of moves to this next organization and has this big break, and that's when it comes through. And he's going to be remembered for those Furniture Row years, right? I mean, the stage winner MTJ era is like so clear in the early stage racing time, and just his domination on the mile and a halves. I mean, Kansas, Kentucky, down the whole list. Those were just his places that he owned for a long time there. I think that's his legacy. And then, I mean, just a good racer. I mean, at the end of the day, good legacy, good driver, and then he'll be remembered for those years with Furniture Row for sure. And then, Stewart-Haas Racing. You kind of have to remove a little bit of a recency bias with Stewart-Haas Racing. It feels like they weren't themselves, maybe post 2020. I think that the Kevin Harvick disappointment in 2020, whether that was it or not, it seems like it was kind of downhill for them from there. But in terms of what they'll be remembered for, I mean, obviously, Tony Stewart joining into moving into an ownership role and the owner driver role, and kind of we hadn't seen that, I guess, in a little bit of time. The Tony Stewart Championship, obviously 2011, all of that was just storybook fantastic. And then really that ends up becoming Kevin Harvick's career car, right? Like, he kind of set up for this RCR career with the 29, moves to SHR, wins that championship out of the gate in the 4 car, and then puts up some fantastic seasons with the 4. I'm sure Ben will let me know about the championships that he could have won. But just an impressive career for Kevin Harvick in the 4 car with Stewart-Haas Racing. Stewart and Harvick will be remembered as the drivers from Stewart-Haas Racing.
Yeah, when it comes to Kevin Harvick, Stewart-Haas Racing, I felt really elevated his years at Richard Childress Racing, and is Kevin Harvick just not able to get that championship because of the team or him? Then he goes to Stewart-Haas, gets that championship. I think it's a great story, and really Stewart-Haas Racing, I think, proved Kevin Harvick what he's worked as a career driver, championship caliber. 2020 just seemed to be the slow start of the downfall for Stewart-Haas Racing. And it just so amazes me, a 4-car team to go from championship caliber. Here we are since 2020, 2024 now, and this team is going to be shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to Truex Jr., I feel like what a remarkable career, especially after what happened with Spingate. Lost his ride. Then he went to Furniture Row Motorsports. And Furniture Row had one win with Regan Smith, the Southern 500. Then they went with Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch, some good races here and there, but didn't get the win. That first year for Truex was pretty lousy. That was when Furniture Row had that alliance with Richard Childress races at the time. The next year, it seemed like, okay, he's starting to get things done. And then that partnership with Toyota, wow, that brought out a lot from him, Furniture Racing. And that was just an unfortunate deal where Furniture Row also had to close up shop the year after they won the championship. It's just one of those deals where I feel for Martin Truex Jr., that opportunity, and especially when Toyota jumped in, really helped his career go much longer, because I thought he was going to be, after Furniture Row, a back marker team or maybe done. But he has made quite a journey since then. In the chat room, 2020 was the most obvious example, but he had a great season. But in the 6 seasons before that, Harvick made the championship for 5 times.
Mhm.
Wall of consistency during his tenure with Stewart-Haas Racing. 2020 was also the most obvious example. Been a 6 season. Oh, looks like the same one's coming up twice. But
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how it was for that whole era, right? It was Kevin Harvick, and then kind of those other SHR cars, right? Like you count on Kevin Harvick to get all these wins, and then maybe Eric Almirola will get a win, maybe Clint Boyer will get a win in there, Kurt Busch will get a win in there, but I mean, it really was Kevin Harvick's team, and then the game has changed a little bit in the next gen era, but Kevin Harvick was a lock. I mean, like Ben said right there, a lock for the championship for every year in that number 4 car. You just could assume that he was going to make it. Just really impressive. And also, you got to shout out that 2018 Talladega playoff race, and they're running 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. It's some really iconic photos, and that also has to go in the the marquee moments that'll define their organization.
Yeah, some big moments for the organization. One of the big things, everyone's going to be looking at those memories from Martin Truex's career, Stewart-Haas's tenure, Jackson 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season, last race of the year. You've been, of course, several races, following the races, including the 100 start metric you use, and staying busy with 36xracing.com. What were some of the standout stories from 2024 and key stories to follow in the off season?
This has really been a fantastic season. I think we felt like 2022 was like a great season because everything was new and like we had all these different winners. But I feel like 2024 was just like, this was a good year. Like we had some great races in there, and it's just the stories all kind of coming to a close here. But in terms of storylines from 2024 that I'd want to shout out, I think something has to be mentioned is that the ECR engines, those cars just weren't really around this year. That would be the RCR cars, right? We talked about Kyle Busch, Austin Dillon's only win being essentially taken away. That's the Trackhouse car where you had the Chastain Kansas win late in the year, and then of course Suarez early in the year at Atlanta, and Colleague wasn't really around either. So those teams they just didn't have it this year, and I'll be interested to see if any of that can rebound next year. So the ECR engine kind of struggle would be one of my stories, and then the fact that Ford was nowhere in the spring. They were nowhere to be found until May, which gave opportunities to we talked about William Byron and Denny Hamlin, guys that performed really well in the spring. The Fords were non-existent. Then Brad Keselowski, of all the Ford drivers, it's Brad Keselowski winning with RFK at Darlington, and then it was just on from there. I mean, they dominated the month after that, and then I mean, here we are with two of the 4 and the championship 4 being Ford. So Ford's come back through the summer, and then the lack of those ECR Chevys would kind of be some notes to me. And then also Carson Hocevar, talking about 100 starts. Carson Hocevar, he's on the way. He's going to win some races here pretty soon. Also, Ty Gibbs would be kind of someone else to keep an eye on, kind of going forward. Gibbs and Hocevar might be guys that we talk about, in the playoffs in the next few years down the line.
Spire Motorsports, it seems to be getting better and better. That's a good deal for Carson. And Ty Gibbs, I think he's just knocking on the door to get that win. And of course, a lot going on. One of the big things, encourage everyone on Twitter, go to @Crossland Racing. Jeff Striegel, of course, 27-year career with Motor Racing Network radio program. Great interview there. Check it out. And of course, 36xracing.com throughout the off season. Now let's get to, I think, one of the hardest questions, because it's always something where people really have a hard time with. Pick a winner. It's down to the championship 3 this weekend, but unfortunately, since there is no playoff reset in pick a winner, Matthew Bro gets 1 point. He is the pick a winner champion, just because we only have 2 MotoGP races in the championship, and then you have Formula One with their races, 1 more sprint, and their championship, assuming Max doesn't claim it by the end before the final race. He probably will. But right now, let's go get started. Jackson, who do you see winning the race?
Gosh. This is tough. This is tough. I feel like I gotta. Am I gonna split? Am I gonna split my picks, or am I gonna go for the double points here? I'm gonna. Here's how I'll do this. I'm gonna pick the race win for Ryan Blaney, but that's not spoiling my championship pick yet.
Race win. I think I'm going to go with a driver not in the playoffs, second year in a row. I think it's going to go to Kyle Larson. So that means championship. Yeah. Who are you gonna stick with, Blaney, or are you gonna split it?
Yeah, see, okay, so I went Blaney for the race because I feel like if Blaney is going to win the championship, I think it's going to be because he wins the race. I don't think we see a repeat with him, at least, of what happened last year. Somebody that I could see winning the championship without winning the race, I'm going to go with Joey Logano for the championship. So I'm splitting the Penske's between my two picks here.
I think for the championship, I have to lean with Logano. I feel since they got that win, first race of the round of 8, that team, Paul Wolf, they're going to bring another rocket car. I don't remember if there's going to be a different tire, if it's going to be softer or anything compared to years past. But I feel that team, they're going to look at their notes. They're going to be ready for this race. They're going to bring home a third championship for Joey Logano. And potentially that could bring a lot of conversations in regards to this format and how it works. But that's something we'll see if that plays out. Adam, pick a winner. Martin Truex Jr. I guess that's a sentimental pick. He could have a good car, but then it just seems like sometimes mistakes ruin his day when he has a good car, or he just doesn't have anything going on. Will be interesting to see what happens. And the championship, William Byron, trying to get his first championship in the Cup Series. And it will be the first time that 24 gets a championship without Jeff Gordon behind the wheel, because we only had Chase Elliott got in the playoffs but didn't get a championship in the 24. Now William Byron trying to start his legacy in the 24. We'll see what happens. That will do it for Grid Live pre-race. Again, big thank you to our Patreon investors on the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. We'll recap this race approximately 90 minutes from the finish tomorrow on Sunday. Grid Encore, ARCA West, Trucks, Xfinity Series. They're going to recap all the action in Phoenix. I don't know if you saw the Truck Series race. Thoughts on what surprisingly seemed to be a clean race, and do you think that could transfer over to a clean Xfinity Series race, Jackson?
Yeah, I feel like we had a lot of drama in the Truck Series, coming here down to the wire. But yeah, Ty Majeski, congrats on the championship. I don't know what we're going to see out of the Xfinity Series today. It feels like they've kind of been all over the place recently too. But yeah, I mean, I feel like good season across the board.
Good season across the board, and of course, we're going to be on the air Monday with Grid Encore. Subscribe, hit that bell icon so you don't miss that program. And then, of course, Grid Tonight. They'll be on the air to recap any of the biggest motorsports news from around the globe. One of the big things, of course, we're coming down to the end of the season next weekend. It's going to be essentially a weekend with MotoGP, Supercar racing, their season finale weekend. So we'll be on the air again to preview and more pick-a-winner opportunities for their championships as well. So plenty of racing still right here on the Grid Network. For Jackson Todd, I'm Joe San Diego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time, and enjoy the races.